Hey, what's up guys? Alex here with a new video, and today we're doing a fun comparison between the Leica Q2 and the brand new Leica Q3. If you're new to the channel, I am a portrait photographer based out of Orlando, Florida, and I primarily shoot with Leica and Sony. I was lucky enough to get my hands and buy my very own Leica Q3 on launch, and I've had this camera now for 2 weeks. For the past 4 years, I've owned and carried a Leica Q2 body on me everywhere. I've owned the Leica Q2, Q2 Monochrome, Q2 Reporter, and I think it's the perfect and ultimate everyday carry camera and travel camera. It's not a perfect camera, and I definitely had my complaints, and the Leica Q3 addresses most of them. For today's video, instead of doing a 40-minute comparison, because it would take forever to compare all the differences because Leica improved so much on the Leica Q3, I'm only going to focus on image quality and the differences between these two sensors. I will be doing follow-up videos on the channel comparing autofocus, going over Leica's new Leica Lux for the Leica Q3, which is their film simulation approach, kind of like Fujifilm, in the Leica world, and of course tons of other videos on the Q3, so if you're into that, feel free to hit the subscribe button down below. But for today, like I mentioned, we're only going to cover image quality. So I took these cameras out, I used a tripod, I handheld, I took a variety of shots, and very quickly I realized that the sensors weren't much different. And then I realized that we quickly forget that when exposing properly, a sensor from today will look almost identical to a sensor from 5 years ago. Sensor technology has not improved drastically in obviously well-lit situations. So when I first started testing these cameras, I was thinking to myself, man, the improvement is none. It's just added resolution. I was almost a little disappointed. And it wasn't until I started pushing the files and pushing the cameras where I realized the huge difference in dynamic range, highlight recovery, shadow recovery that the Leica Q3 brings to the table. So enough of me talking about it. Let me go ahead and pull out my laptop and show you. I will say all the files we go over today and some will be available for you to download so you can check them out yourself on your own computer so you can come up with your own conclusions. With that said, let me bust out the laptop and let's get started. Okay, I mentioned it, but I'm going to show you anyways so you believe me. But we'll start off with some very basic and boring images properly exposed so you can see how close these images look. Here we have 2 raw files with the Leica embedded color profile on them. Both shot handheld, so you might notice a difference here in the composition. But other than that, they have not been touched. On the left, we have the Leica Q2. On the right, we have the Leica Q3. And you can tell by the resolution here in the top. And both images look close to identical. These images are also both auto white balance. These sensors do read white balance differently, but in the end, when you do auto white balance, you'll get similar results. Zooming into these images, you're going to notice that the Q3 has more resolution, but other than that, photos look almost the same. Let's look at another boring set of properly exposed images before we get to the juicy stuff. Again, here on the right, we have the Q3, on the left, Q2, handheld, no changes, both look identical. Zooming in, obviously you have more detail with 60 megapixels on the Q3. Looking at the sky, from this image, they both look good. They both have good highlight retention, but we know with a Leica Q2, you can easily blow out the highlights. In this scenario, properly exposed, we're good. But what happens when we start pushing these files? Like I mentioned, properly exposed, we're gonna get very similar results, almost no upgrade. So let's go ahead and push the highlights. The Q2 is notorious for easily blowing out the highlights. Let's see if the Q3 improved on that and by how much. So in this set of images, we have the model here in front of us. I have pushed these images in the shadows. I believe I pushed it to 50. I pushed the exposure a little bit and I brought down the highlights to 100. On the left, we have the Q2. On the right, we have the Q3. And on this image, I don't even have to look at the resolution. I can already tell which one's which. Here's why. When you look at the Q2 and you look at this white bench in the background, you see that it's almost glowing because of the highlight retention. Doesn't do very good with the Q2. The Q3, you can see the detail in the bench, and you can see that the highlights aren't necessarily blown out. When you zoom out and you start looking at the images again, you're going to notice that the Q3 has way better highlight retention, not only in this white bench, but in the detail in the clouds and the background. So here's where I started noticing the differences. The Q3 just does better with highlights, which is great news because I was normally underexposing my Q2 photos by about a half a stop just to make sure I didn't blow out my highlights. With the Q3, I don't think that will be necessary anymore. Let's go ahead and look at another example of this highlight retention with the Q3. Now for this set, it was shot with a tripod. We have the Q2 on the left, Q3 on the right. When I zoom in, you're going to notice that inside the tower, again, the Q2 is blowing out some of the highlights inside with all the lights. Yet with the Q3, we still have detail here inside the tower. So safe to say the Q3 improves the highlights, which means better dynamic range, right? So how does a Q3 do with shadow recovery? The Q2, I think the maximum stops I would push the files to is maybe 2.5 stops, 2 stops, because the Q2 also introduced a lot of color banding when you push the files too much. So you had that limit with the highlights, and you also had a little limit with the shadow recovery before you introduced banding. Let's see how that's improved. So for this image, again with a tripod, I have pushed the shadows and brought down the highlights. Q2's on the left, Q3's on the right, and here's where we're gonna see a massive improvement. When I zoom in here on this post on the left-hand side, you're gonna notice that the Q2 just has a ton of color noise and noise in general. As a matter of fact, you lose detail in this entire light post. On the Q3, you still have some noise, but you no longer have that color noise, which means you have detail. This is, I believe, 3 stops pushed from an exposure perspective, but you can see how much cleaner the Q3 is. So the Q3 introduces just better dynamic range overall. What about high ISO? That was my next question, so let's go ahead and show you some samples at ISO 6400 and ISO 3200 so we can take a look. So for this set of images, we have Baby Yoda, ISO 6400, and I did push the shadows just a hair. When we zoom in, we're going to notice that both these images do have noise. As a matter of fact, the noise is tighter on the Leica Q3. That could be because it's a higher resolution sensor, but the same noise is present. So noise didn't improve too much. But again, with the Q2, when you go to the left-hand corner, you start seeing the muddiness of the noise take away detail and introduce some color banding and color noise. Versus the Q3, yes, you still have the same amount of noise, but you don't have any of the color banding, and you do have more detail in the image. When you look at the Q2 here, there is no software that can fix it. Topaz Denoise, Lightroom's new AI Denoise can't fix this. The Q3 still has enough detail where you can reduce some of that noise and sharpen it up a bit. So not the best improvement from a just overall noise perspective, but again, it's showing a lot better dynamic range and 0 color banding, which is a pretty big upgrade. We'll look at ISO 3200, and then we will show you an extreme example of pushing the shadows and exposure. Here on the right-hand side, Q3, Q2 on the left, ISO 3200. Zooming in, the Q3 is cleaner again, tighter noise, going again to the side and the corners. You start seeing again color noise on the Q2 and color banding where you don't see that on the Q3. So overall, nice upgrade. We went up in resolution and it didn't get worse. So that's usually what happens when you go with a higher resolution sensor. When you went from the Q to Q2, high ISO took a hit. Luckily here, high ISO isn't taking a hit, it's actually getting better. So pretty impressed by that. Let's go ahead and look at an extreme example of shadow recoveries. So in this example, I pushed the photo 3 stops, and let's go ahead and see the results. Zooming in, we're gonna notice that in the center of the frame where it's well lit, it overall both look pretty good. The Q2, you can already start seeing some noise. As a matter of fact, in the Q3, you can also see some color noise here, pushing it 3 stops. If we go ahead and zoom in, you're gonna see that The Q3 starts bringing in some color banding and color noise when you do push it 3 stops, but it's not as bad as the Q2. So I would say that Q3 is maybe a stop to a stop and a half better than the Q2 in shadow recovery. I don't know how to quantify the highlight recovery, but I can say that the Q3 is definitely better with highlights. I'm going to end it with this one image here. I edited this image on both the Q2 and Q3, and I want to end it here because I want to show you this. When you look at these images, they look almost identical. When you're shooting in good light and exposed properly, you're going to get great results with either camera. You can zoom in, both have great colors, both have great detail, they both look incredible. So again, when you look at this new sensor and when you look at new sensors in general, there are tools that help you in more extreme situations than they do in perfectly lit situations. So if you're a studio photographer, you're always shooting in perfect lighting, this might not necessarily be a big upgrade for you. But when you're pushing and demanding more of your files, that's when you start getting some of the differences. So let me go ahead and close the laptop down and just talk about my final conclusions here with the Q2 and Q3 from an image quality perspective. So what'd you think? Look, on paper, it might not seem like the biggest upgrade, but when you're pushing the files, having that extra latitude and dynamic range and that extra latitude with higher ISO is important. So overall, it is a nice upgrade. And when you factor in the entire package, the new tiltable screen, new higher resolution screen, new higher resolution EVF, new and improved phase detect autofocusing, better battery life, 8K video, the package the Q3 brings to the table is incredible, and there is no other camera on the market that is that size and is that capable. It still has the incredible 28mm 1.7 lens, and I'm telling you, I'm just hyped about this camera because of all the improvements. I will be doing other videos going over Leica's autofocus. I still need to do more testing with the new autofocusing system. From my early conclusions using it for 2 weeks, it is improved. Is it drastic? At the moment, it's not. Again, I need to say this. For the last 5 years, Leica has improved the Q2's autofocusing system. The Q2 today is night and day better than the Q2 was when it launched, with all the firmware upgrades Leica has given. The Q3 is still in version 1 of its autofocusing system. So if Leica puts the same attention, love, and care into the Q3, the autofocusing system will be incredible with a few updates. Right now, it's an improvement. It's not nowhere near close to Sony or Canon, but it is better. And like I mentioned, I will talk about it when I get more comfortable with the new autofocusing system. The best part about all this, with the Q3 being incredible and being such a great camera, is that the Q2's used price will also drop. I've started to see Q2s go on the used market for around $3,700. At $3,700, you're still getting an incredible camera that will last you for years with an incredible sensor and an incredible package. So I think it just gets me excited because this new reduction in price in the used market will make the Q2 more accessible to more photographers. And I think this video, I want you to look at the files. I want you to download the files because if you do choose to go with a Q2 or that is your entry point, you're getting an incredible camera. And I don't want you to have FOMO over the Q3 because you're still getting an incredible package and an incredible value. In the end, I think this is a win-win situation for everybody, and I just couldn't be happier. But as always, guys, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments down below. I'm also adding my Instagram. If you want to DM me, I love to have conversations, geek out over technology, so feel free to do that. If you want to see the future content, I think my next video I'll cover Leica's looks. They're kind of film simulations for the Q3. Hit the subscribe button, and as always, I will see you on the next one. Have a good one, guys. Peace.